A mountain man saw a husband beating his blind wife, and what he did next saved 2 lives. In a dusty frontier town, the crowd turned away, but one man couldn't. He stepped out of the shadows, coat still dusted from the high country, and faced the drunk with fire in his eyes. The husband swung again, until the mountain man's hand caught his wrist, ending the cruelty right there in the street. But what began as a moment of justice sparks a storm no one saw coming. The blind woman's husband swears revenge. The law calls it kidnapping. And the mountain man must choose between his freedom and her life. Snow will fall, blood will freeze, and 2 broken souls will have to trust each other to survive the winter. Because hidden in that cabin on the mountain lies a secret that could change everything. Can compassion heal what cruelty destroyed? Or will mercy cost him the only second chance he's ever had? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Leadville's muddy main street as Jordan Hale guided his horse through the spring thaw. Snowmelt from the high peaks had turned the dirt road into a treacherous mix of slush and mud that squelched beneath his mount's hooves. The familiar scents of wood smoke and coal dust hung in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of fresh pine from the lumber mill at the edge of town. Jordan's weathered face remained impassive as he surveyed the street, though his eyes missed nothing. 20 years in the high country had taught him to read both terrain and people with equal care. A bundle of winter furs was secured behind his saddle, beaver, marten, and fox pelts that would fetch a fair price at the trading post. His clothes, though worn, were clean and well-maintained, speaking to the disciplined habits that had kept him alive in the wilderness. He dismounted near Grayson's blacksmith shop, the rhythmic ping of hammer on anvil echoing across the street. The leather of his saddle creaked as he tied his horse to the hitching post, patting the animal's neck with a gentle hand. Jordan had just begun to loosen the cinch when angry voices caught his attention. "Clumsy fool." The words cracked like a whip across the street. "Can't even carry a simple loaf of bread without dropping it in the mud." Jordan turned to see a man, River Crane, he recalled from previous visits to town, towering over a slight woman in a faded blue dress. Julia Crane's unseeing eyes were fixed straight ahead as her husband berated her, her face a mask of quiet dignity, despite the fear evident in her rigid posture. "I'm sorry, River," she said softly, her voice barely carrying across the street. The ground was uneven. The crack of River's hand across her face echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Julia stumbled backward, catching herself against the wall of the general store. Blood welled at the corner of her mouth where her lip had split against her teeth. Townspeople hurried past, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched. A woman hurried her children into the mercantile. The telegraph operator paused in his doorway, then slowly closed it. No one wanted to get involved with River Crane's business, especially when he'd been drinking, and the whiskey on his breath was evident even from where Jordan stood. Jordan moved without conscious thought, crossing the muddy street in long strides. River's arm was already drawn back for another blow when Jordan's hand closed around his wrist like an iron band. "That's enough." Jordan's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of mountain winters and lonely trails. River tried to wrench his arm free, his face flushing an ugly red. "Get your hands off me, trapper. This ain't your concern." Making it my concern. Jordan didn't raise his voice, but his grip tightened until River winced. Julia stood perfectly still, one hand pressed to her bleeding lip, head cocked slightly as she listened to the confrontation. Her other hand found the rough wood of the store's wall, using it to orient herself. "Sheriff!" River bellowed, spittle flying from his lips. "Sheriff Curtis!" The sound of boots splashing through mud announced the lawman's arrival. Sheriff Curtis was a round-faced man with a gray mustache and tired eyes. He took in the scene with a weary expression. "We got trouble here, gentlemen?" "This mountain man's assaulting me." River's voice rose higher. "Disturbing the peace, interfering with a man disciplining his wife." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Now, Mr. Hale, we don't want any trouble here. Best let him go and move along." Jordan remained still, his eyes never leaving River's face. "Striking a blind woman isn't discipline." "The law's clear on a man's rights regarding his wife," the sheriff said, though he couldn't quite meet Jordan's gaze. "Don't make me arrest you for disturbing the peace." The street had grown quiet, save for the distant barking of dogs and the whisper of wind through the new leaves. Townsfolk gathered at windows and doorways, watching the drama unfold, but unwilling to take sides. Then Julia spoke, her voice soft but clear as a mountain stream. "He didn't start it, he stopped it." Those simple words seemed to hover in the air, and Jordan saw several onlookers drop their eyes in shame. Julia's quiet dignity cut through the pretense that River's behavior was acceptable, that the town's willingness to look away was anything but cowardice. Jordan finally released River's wrist, but positioned himself between the angry man and Julia. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "the mission house is just down the street. Would you allow me to escort you there?" Julia nodded, her unseeing eyes directed somewhere past Jordan's shoulder. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. I would appreciate that." River's face twisted with rage. "Julia, you take one. Step with this man and what?" Jordan's voice carried the bite of mountain frost. "You'll hurt her again? In front of witnesses?" River's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. Then he spat in the mud at Jordan's feet. "This ain't over, Trapper." He turned and stalked toward the saloon, shoulder-checking a young boy out of his way. The sheriff watched him go, then turned back to Jordan. "You're making trouble where you don't need to, Hale. Man's got a right to handle his household as he sees fit." "Right and wrong ain't always written in law books, Sheriff." Jordan offered his arm to Julia, waiting patiently as she found it with careful fingers. Together they walked slowly down the muddy street, Jordan matching his pace to hers. He described any obstacles in their path, a deep puddle here, a loose board there, in a low, steady voice. Julia's steps were sure despite her blindness, her head held high despite the bruise darkening on her cheek. Behind them, the town hummed with whispered conversations. Jordan could feel the weight of stares from every window and doorway. He'd broken an unspoken rule by interfering in another man's domestic matters. But the sight of Julia's quiet strength made him certain he'd done right. The first few snowflakes began to drift down as they reached the mission house, its whitewashed walls glowing in the gathering dusk. Lanterns were being lit along the street, their warm light reflecting off the wet ground and the fresh snow. "Thank you, Mr. Hale," Julia said as they reached the mission house steps. Her fingers traced the familiar railing. "Not many would have done what you did." "Not many should have needed to," Jordan replied quietly. Sister Mary Catherine appeared in the doorway, her weather-lined face creasing with concern at the sight of Julia's split lip. "Oh, child," she said softly. "Come inside where it's warm. We'll get you cleaned up." As Julia climbed the steps with practiced ease, she paused. "Mr. Hale? River. He holds grudges. Please be careful." Jordan touched the brim of his hat, though she couldn't see the gesture. "I reckon I've faced worse than River Crane in my time, ma'am. You just rest easy." The mission house door closed behind Julia and Sister Mary Catherine, but the warmth of their lantern light spilled out through the windows, a beacon in the gathering storm. Jordan stood for a moment in the swirling snow, watching as other lights bloomed along the street like earth-bound stars. The town had changed in the hours since he'd ridden in. Whispers followed him as he made his way back to his horse, not the usual mutterings about the strange mountain man who preferred silence to society, but something different. Some voices held approval, others concern, and more than a few spoke of Julia's courage in speaking up. The snow was falling harder now, fat flakes catching in Jordan's beard as he adjusted his horse's blanket. Tomorrow would be soon enough to trade his furs. Tonight, he had given the good people of Leadville something to think about, and perhaps given one brave woman a chance to hope for something better. As he led his horse toward the livery stable, Jordan could still hear Julia's quiet voice in his mind. He didn't start it, he stopped it. Simple words that had cut through months or years of collective silence. Sometimes, he reflected, it took more courage to speak truth softly than to shout it from the rooftops. The growing darkness was broken by warm squares of lamplight from windows and the occasional lantern swinging from a post. Through the thickening snow, Jordan could see figures moving about their evening business, a mother calling her children in from play, a shopkeeper securing his shutters against the storm, a young couple hurrying toward the warmth of home. But there were other movements, too. Heads bent close together in conversation, people gathering in small groups despite the weather, discussing what they'd witnessed. The comfortable silence that had allowed River's cruelty to go unchecked had been broken. And like spring ice on a mountain stream, once broken it couldn't easily be mended. Jordan knew that his intervention had set something in motion that couldn't be undone. He'd seen it in Julia's straight spine as she walked away from her husband's fury, in the shame-faced looks of townspeople who had too long looked away, in River's impotent rage at being publicly checked. The livery stable's familiar sense of hay and horse enveloped him as he led his mount inside. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now he had done what needed doing. Sometimes that was all a man could do, stand between harm and the harmed, and trust that others would find their courage in time. Inside the mission house, warmth from the pot-bellied stove wrapped around them like a blanket. The familiar sense of lamp oil and fresh-baked bread mingled with herbs from Sister Mary Catherine's medicine cabinet. Julia sat quietly in a worn wooden chair, while Reverend Coulter dabbed at her split lip with a damp cloth. "Hold still now," the preacher said gently, his weathered hands steady as he worked. "This witch hazel will help with the swelling." His kind eyes crinkled with concern as he examined the darkening bruise on her cheek. Jordan stood near the door, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the lamplight. He'd removed his hat but kept his coat on, as if uncertain whether to stay or go. His gaze kept drifting to Julia, noting how she held herself with quiet dignity, despite her injuries. The Reverend glanced up at Jordan, recognition flickering across his face. "I remember you," he said softly. "You used to come to services with Sarah before the accident." He paused, watching Jordan's expression carefully. "Must be going on 5 years now since that avalanche took her." Jordan's jaw tightened, but he gave a slight nod. The memory of his wife, buried under tons of mountain snow, still cut like a knife. He'd stopped attending services after that, retreating to the high country where only the wind and wildlife could witness his grief. Sister Mary Catherine bustled in with a tray of tin cups and a steaming pot of coffee. "Sit down, Mr. Hale," she urged. "You're making me nervous, hovering there like a shadow." Her tone was gentle, despite the words, and she smiled as she poured the coffee. Julia's fingers found her cup carefully, wrapping around its warmth. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for the coffee. For what you did in the street. Most folks, they just pretend not to see." "Wasn't right, what he did," Jordan replied simply, finally taking a seat near the stove. The wooden chair creaked under his weight. Through the mission house's windows, they could hear River's voice carrying from the saloon 2 blocks away, growing louder and more belligerent with each passing hour. His threats echoed off the buildings, punctuated by the occasional breaking of glass. Reverend Coulter sighed, setting aside his medical supplies. "Jordan, I know your heart's in the right place, but you need to understand something." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The law gives a husband certain rights over his wife. Right or wrong, that's how it stands. If River wants to press charges for interference—" "Then let him," Jordan interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. The firelight caught the silver threading through his dark beard as he stared into the flames. Some things matter more than law. Julia's unseeing eyes turned toward his voice. "Mr. Hale, I appreciate what you did today, but Reverend Coulter is right. River won't let this go. He'll make trouble for you, and I couldn't bear having another person hurt because of me." Jordan watched the fire dance, memories of Sarah rising unbidden in his mind. He remembered her laugh, the way she'd loved watching summer storms roll in across the peaks. The avalanche had taken her so quickly. One moment she was there, the next gone, leaving nothing but silence and guilt that he hadn't been able to protect her. "Ma'am," he said finally, "there's different kinds of hurt in this world. Standing by while wrong is done. That's its own kind of pain." His voice roughened. "I've had my fill of that kind." Sister Mary Catherine touched Julia's shoulder gently. "You should rest, child. Your room is ready upstairs." Julia nodded, rising carefully from her chair. Her fingers found the familiar path to the staircase, but she paused at the bottom step. "Thank you all," she said softly, "for everything." The stairs creaked gently as she made her way up, leaving the 3 others in thoughtful silence. Reverend Coulter waited until her footsteps faded before speaking again. "Jordan, I know that look in your eyes. You're fixing to get involved in something that could turn ugly fast." He leaned back in his chair, studying the younger man. "River's got friends in town, people who owe him favors. The sheriff won't help. He's more concerned with keeping peace than doing right." "Then he's keeping the wrong kind of peace," Jordan replied, his voice low and steady. "You can't save everyone, son." The preacher's tone was gentle. "Sometimes the kindest thing is to let people work out their own troubles." Jordan finally looked up from the fire, meeting the older man's gaze. "Like the town's been doing? Letting him beat on a blind woman while they pretend not to notice?" He shook his head. "That ain't kindness, Reverend. That's cowardice wearing a polite face." A particularly loud burst of shouting from the saloon made them all turn towards the window. River's voice rose above the others, slurred but full of venom, promising to teach his wife and that mountain man a lesson they wouldn't forget. Sister Mary Catherine crossed herself quietly. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "Amen to that," Reverend Coulter agreed. "But mercy seems in short supply these days." Jordan stood, stretching his tall frame. "Think I'll step out for a spell," he said. "Need some air." The night air bit cold against his face as he stepped onto the mission house's small porch. Stars crowded the sky, diamond bright against the black velvet of night. In the distance, wolves called to each other across the hills, their howls mixing with the wind's lonely cry. For the first time in 5 years, Jordan felt the urge to pray. He hadn't spoken to God since Sarah died, hadn't seen the point. but something about Julia's quiet courage, her dignity in the face of cruelty, had awakened something he'd thought long dead. He leaned against the porch railing, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Lord," he whispered roughly, "I ain't been much for talking to you lately. Reckon I've been angry too long." He paused, searching for words. "Don't know if you're listening, but if you are, that woman in there needs help. She needs someone to stand between her and harm." His fingers tightened on the weathered wood. "I couldn't save Sarah. Maybe you're giving me a chance to make that right in some small way." The wind gusted, carrying the wolves' song closer. Jordan remembered what Sarah used to say about wolf howls, that they were God's way of reminding people they weren't alone in their wildness or their longing. He hadn't understood what she meant back then. Now, somehow, he did. Inside, he could hear Reverend Coulter and Sister Mary Catherine moving about, banking the fire for the night. Above, a board creaked softly, Julia, perhaps, finding her way to bed in the darkness she knew so well. Jordan straightened, his decision made. Whatever trouble River Crane wanted to bring, he would face it. Some things were worth the cost. Some wrongs needed to be made right, no matter what the law said about a husband's rights or a stranger's duty to look the other way. The wolves called again, their voices echoing off the mountainsides. Jordan lifted his face to the star-filled sky, feeling more at peace than he had in years. Sometimes, he realized, purpose found a man when he least expected it. Sometimes grace came in the simple act of standing up for what was right. He would stay. He would protect Julia, no matter what River or the town thought about it. And maybe, in doing so, he would find his way back to something he'd lost in that avalanche 5 years ago. Not just faith, but the man he used to be. The man Sarah had loved. The man who believed in more than just survival. The wind died down, leaving the night still and expectant. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, Jordan was content to stand in the starlight, listening to the wolves sing their ancient songs to the darkness. For the first time in years, he felt truly awake, truly present in his own skin. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. Morning light crept over the Leadville Mountains, painting the muddy streets in pale gold. The town stirred awake as shopkeepers opened their doors and miners trudged toward the silver mines that had given the town its name. But today, an ugly tension hung in the air like storm clouds gathering. River Crane stumbled out of the saloon where he'd spent the night, his clothes wrinkled and stained with spilled whiskey. His eyes were red-rimmed and wild as he made his way toward the livery stable, drawing a small crowd of onlookers with his loud cursing. "Where is she?" he shouted, his voice hoarse from a night of drinking. "Where's my wife?" He fumbled in his coat pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. The marriage certificate was dog-eared and spotted with drink, but still legal. Jordan stood on the mission house porch, watching Rivers approach. Behind him, Julia sat in the kitchen with Sister Mary Catherine, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Even through the closed door, she could hear her husband's voice growing closer. "That mountain man stole my property," Rivers' words carried across the street. He waved the marriage certificate like a flag. "Sheriff, you gonna let him get away with theft?" Sheriff Mills emerged from his office, adjusting his gun belt with deliberate slowness. He'd been dreading this confrontation since word reached him about yesterday's incident. "Now, River, let's handle this proper-like. No need for shouting." "Proper-like?" River spat into the mud. "That trapper took my wife. That paper says she's mine, legal and true." He thrust the certificate toward the sheriff's face. "You read that yourself when we got married. You witnessed it." The sheriff couldn't deny it. He had indeed witnessed their marriage 2 years ago, back when River still had prospects in the mines, and Julia's father thought he was making a good match for his blind daughter. How things had changed since then. More townspeople gathered near the livery, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Henderson from the general store shook her head sadly. "That poor girl," she whispered to her neighbor. "We all saw what he did to her yesterday." The sheriff raised his hands, trying to calm the situation. "River, you're right about the law, but given the circumstances..." He glanced at the mission house. "I reckon we ought to let Julia speak her piece. It's only fair." "Fair?" River's laugh was ugly. "Since when does a wife get to choose whether she obeys her husband?" Jordan's jaw tightened at those words. He turned and went inside the mission house, where Julia sat perfectly still, her unseeing eyes fixed on nothing. "He's out there," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. Sheriff wants to hear your choice." Jordan's voice was gentle. "But you don't have to face him if you don't want to." Julia stood carefully, her hand finding the familiar edge of the table. "Yes, I do. Some things need saying in the light of day." Reverend Coulter appeared in the doorway. "Child, are you sure? The law isn't always right, Reverend." Julia's voice was steady despite her trembling hands. "Will you help me to the door?" The preacher took her arm, guiding her onto the porch. Jordan followed, positioning himself between her and the crowd. The morning sun caught the bruise on her cheek, the split in her lip still visible from yesterday's beating. River saw her and took a step forward, his face darkening. "Julia, get down here right now." She lifted her chin. Though she couldn't see the crowd watching, she could feel their presence, hear their murmurs. "No, River, I won't." Her clear words carried across the sudden silence. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. "You don't get a choice!" River's face flushed dark with rage. "Sheriff, arrest that man! He took my wife!" Sheriff Mills looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said formally, "your husband has a legal right to beat me?" Julia's quiet words cut through his official tone. "To break my fingers when supper's late? To lock me in the root cellar for days?" Her hands were shaking harder now, but her voice remained steady. "I may be blind, Sheriff, but I see clearer than most in this town. I won't go back." River grabbed an empty whiskey bottle from the hitching post. "You ungrateful woman." He smashed the bottle against the wood, sending glass shards flying. "I took you in when nobody else would have a blind wife. I gave you a home." "You gave me hell," Julia replied softly, "and I'm done living in it." The sheriff shifted his weight, torn between the law he was sworn to uphold and the justice he could see with his own eyes. "River," he said finally, "I ain't arresting nobody today. Go sleep it off." "You're all going to regret this." River's voice cracked with fury. He pointed a shaking finger at Jordan. "You especially, Mountain Man. I got friends in this territory. We'll find you, wherever you run to. And when we do..." He left the threat hanging as he staggered away toward the saloon, kicking over a water barrel in his rage. The crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to watch Jordan help Julia back inside the mission house. Some nodded approval, others shook their heads at the flouting of law and custom. But none could forget the sight of the blind woman standing straight and proud, choosing her own path at last. Inside, Sister Mary Catherine helped Julia pack her few belongings, a worn Bible, 2 dresses, a hairbrush that had belonged to her mother. Jordan spoke quietly with Reverend Coulter, planning their departure. "We'll need to leave after dark," Jordan said, his voice low. "River's got friends watching the roads. Best not to risk a daylight journey." The Reverend nodded. "I can lend you my wagon. Not much to look at, but the wheels are sound." He hesitated. "Where will you take her?" "Better you don't know, Reverend. River's likely to come asking. The day crept by with agonizing slowness. Julia sat by the window, feeling the sun move across her face. Though she couldn't see the town she'd called home for 2 years, she could picture it clearly. The rutted streets, the false front buildings, the mountains rising behind like guardian angels. Would she ever return? As dusk approached, Jordan loaded their sparse belongings into the Reverend's wagon. He'd traded some of his furs for supplies: flour, coffee, salt pork, ammunition. Sister Mary Catherine added a loaf of fresh bread and a jar of preserved peaches, pressing them into Julia's hands with a whispered blessing. The sun had just set when Reverend Coulter pulled Jordan aside. From his study, he retrieved a small leather-bound Bible, well worn but carefully tended. "Take this," he said, pressing it into Jordan's hands. "You can't save a woman's body without healing her soul, and your own." His eyes were knowing. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, son. Maybe he sent you here for more than just trading furs." Jordan started to protest, but the old preacher raised a hand. "Just take it. Read it or don't, but take it. Words of comfort can find us in strange places." The wagon creaked as Jordan helped Julia up onto the seat. She clutched her shawl around her shoulders, face turned toward the cooling night air. Behind them, a single lantern cast a dim glow, barely enough to light their way, but hopefully not enough to draw attention. "Ready?" Jordan asked softly. Julia nodded, her fingers finding the rough wood of the seat. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm ready." The wagon rolled quietly through the darkening streets of Leadville, past the shuttered shops, and the saloon where River's voice could still be heard, growing hoarser with each passing hour. At the edge of town, Reverend Coulter and Sister Mary Catherine stood watching, their prayers following the wagon as it disappeared into the gathering night. Julia sat straight beside Jordan, her face turned toward the wind. Though fear still trembled in her hands, there was something else there too. Hope, fragile as a wildflower pushing through mountain snow, but growing stronger, with each turn of the wheels carrying her toward freedom. The lantern swung gently behind them, its light a dim beacon in the darkness. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the wild beauty of the frontier. But for now, there was just the quiet creak of the wagon, the steady breath of the horses, and 2 souls finding their way through the night, guided by something greater than themselves. The wagon creaked through the gathering darkness, its wheels finding uncertain purchase on the frozen trail. Jordan kept the reins loose in his practiced hands, letting the team pick their way carefully around ice-slick rocks and frozen mud. Beside him, Julia sat wrapped in every blanket they could spare, her face turned into the bitter wind. The mule following behind snorted its displeasure, its hooves crunching through patches of leftover snow. The beast carried their supplies and Jordan's winter furs, now worth less than the woman's safety beside him. He glanced at her profile, noting how she held herself straight despite the cold, refusing to bow even to nature's harsh touch. Sleet began to fall as they climbed higher into the mountains, the frozen drops rattling against the wagon's canvas cover. Julia's hands tightened on the rough wooden seat, but she made no sound of complaint. Her face remained serene, turned slightly upward as if reading the weather through her skin. "Storm's coming," Jordan said, his first words in hours. "We'll need to make camp soon." Julia nodded, her unseeing eyes directed forward. "I can hear it in the wind," she said softly. "The way it moans through the trees different than down in town." Jordan felt a flicker of surprise at her observation. Most folks just heard noise in the mountain winds, but she was already learning its language. "There's a creek ahead," he told her. "Good place to stop. protected from the worst of the weather. The horses picked their way down a gentle slope, their breath steaming in the gathering dusk. Jordan guided them off the main trail, following a smaller path he knew well. The sound of half-frozen water reached them, its music muffled by ice but still singing beneath the surface. "Here we are," he said, drawing the team to a halt in a small clearing. Old-growth pines towered above them, their branches heavy with ice but offering shelter from the wind. The creek chuckled nearby, its banks crusted with snow. Julia tilted her head, listening. "It sounds peaceful here." "It is." Jordan climbed down, his boots crunching in the snow. He came around to her side of the wagon, offering his arm. "Watch your step now. Ground's uneven." She took his arm without hesitation, her touch light but trusting. Her feet found the wagon step, and she descended carefully, testing each movement before committing her weight. Jordan steadied her as she reached the ground, noting how she turned her head slightly, mapping their surroundings through sound and air pressure. "The creek's about 20 paces that way," he said, pointing though she couldn't see. "Trees all around us, but this clearing's safe. I've camped here many times." While Julia stood listening to the forest's evening sounds, Jordan made camp with practiced efficiency. He unhitched the team and the mule, rubbing them down and setting them to graze on the few patches of grass poking through the snow. A fire pit already existed in the clearing, and soon he had flames dancing, pushing back the gathering darkness. "Might not be what you're used to," he said as he spread blankets near the fire, "but it's warmer than most think out here if you know how to manage." Julia smiled slightly. "After the root cellar, anywhere is warm enough." She didn't say it with bitterness, just stating a fact, but Jordan felt anger curl in his gut at the reminder of River's cruelty. He helped her settle on a log near the fire, then set about preparing their evening meal. Sister Mary Catherine had packed them well: salt pork, beans, and even some cornbread. The food soon sizzled in his old iron skillet, filling the clearing with homey smells that seemed to soften the wild edges of the night. They ate in comfortable silence, the fire crackling and pine boughs whispering overhead. The sleet had stopped, leaving the air crystal clear and bitter cold. Stars began to appear, pricking through the darkening sky like diamond dust. "The stars are out," Jordan said after a while, noticing how Julia's face was turned upward. "Bright ones tonight." "I remember stars," she said softly. "Sometimes I think I can feel their warmth, even if I can't see them anymore." Jordan studied her face in the firelight. "How long has it been?" "Since I could see?" Julia's fingers traced patterns in the air. 8 years now. I was 16 when the measles came through our town. So many sick that winter." She paused, lost in memory. "The fever was bad enough, but when it broke, my eyes, everything was dark. The doctor said the disease sometimes does that." Jordan added another log to the fire, letting her take her time with the telling. "I had such dreams before that," she continued, her voice distant. "Wanted to be a teacher, if you can believe it. Had already started helping at the school." A small smile touched her lips. "I could read anything you put in front of me, fast as lightning. Used to drive my ma crazy, the way I'd stay up all night with books." "What happened after?" Jordan asked quietly. Julia's hands stilled in her lap. "Ma died that same winter. Pa tried his best, but he was lost without her. Started drinking too much. Then River came through town." Her voice grew softer. "He seemed so kind at first. Said he'd take care of me, give me a good life. Pa was relieved to have someone take me off his hands, I think." The fire popped, sending sparks swirling upward toward the stars. Jordan waited, knowing there was more. "River was different once we were married," she said finally. The drinking got worse after his mind failed. He changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. She turned her face toward Jordan. You're the first person who ever stepped in. Everyone else just looked away. Jordan studied the flames, remembering his own losses, his own darkness. Sometimes looking away is easier than doing what's right, he said slowly. Doesn't make it right, though. They sat in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts while the fire burned lower and the stars wheeled overhead. Finally, Jordan helped Julia to her bedroll, making sure she was warm enough before banking the fire for the night. The next day brought more climbing, the wagon groaning as they wound their way higher into the mountains. Jordan kept one eye on the sky, watching the clouds build. Snow was coming. He could smell it in the air. Julia seemed to sense it too. The air feels different, she observed. Heavier? Jordan nodded, then remembered she couldn't see it. Snow's coming, but we're not far now. Should reach my cabin by nightfall. The day passed slowly, marked by the steady plod of hooves and creak of wheels. Jordan pointed out landmarks as they traveled. A lightning-struck tree that marked a turn in the trail, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, the distant cry of an eagle riding the winds above them. Julia listened intently to each description, building a map in her mind of this new world. She asked careful questions about distances and directions, clearly determined to learn her way around, even without sight. Late in the afternoon, just as the first snowflakes began to fall, they crested a final ridge. Jordan drew the team to a halt, looking down at the small valley below. We're here, he said quietly. The cabin sat tucked against the base of a cliff, protected from the worst of the winds. A small creek, different from their camping spot, ran nearby, and a stack of split wood stood ready beside the door. It wasn't much to look at, just a simple log structure with a stone chimney, but it was solid and had sheltered him through many winters. What do you hear? He asked Julia as they sat there. She tilted her head, listening. Water, closer than before, wind in the trees, but gentler here, like the mountains are cupping this place in their hands. She smiled slightly. And something else? Grouse? I hear them calling. Good ear, Jordan said, impressed. There's a whole family of them that lives in those bushes down there. Been here as long as I have. He guided the wagon down the last slope as the snow began falling in earnest. By the time they reached the cabin, white flakes were swirling thick around them, beginning to stick to the frozen ground. Jordan helped Julia down from the wagon, then quickly got the team and mule settled in the lean-to stable he'd built years ago. By the time he finished, his tracks back to the cabin were already filling with fresh snow. Inside, the cabin was cold and dark, smelling of wood smoke and solitude. Jordan moved, surely through the darkness, knowing every inch of the space. Soon he had a fire blazing in the stone hearth, pushing back the shadows and filling the single room with warmth. Julia stood where he'd left her, one hand on the rough-hewn wall, listening to him move about. It feels peaceful here, she said finally. Jordan looked around the cabin with new eyes as the firelight grew stronger. He'd lived here alone so long, he'd stopped seeing it as anything but shelter. But now he noticed the way the firelight played on the log walls, the neat arrangement of his few possessions, the way the single window caught the last of the daylight even through the falling snow. Been a while since anyone else was here, he said, suddenly aware of how sparse his living was. But we'll make do. He cleared a space near the hearth, setting up a bed for her with fresh straw tick and clean blankets. His own bedroll he placed respectfully distant, on the other side of the room. Fire's right there, he told her, helping her map the space with her hands. "Table's here, water bucket here. Door's 10 steps that way. Everything's simple, but you'll learn your way quick enough." Julia ran her fingers along the edge of the table, a smile touching her lips. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Jordan busied himself with making supper, uncomfortable with gratitude. The familiar tasks of domestic life felt strange with another person in the cabin, but not unwelcome. The sound of Julia's quiet breathing mixed with the crackle of the fire and the steadily falling snow outside. After they'd eaten, Jordan banked the fire for the night while Julia settled into her bed near the hearth. The storm sang against the cabin walls, but inside was warm and still. "Sleep well," Jordan said quietly, rolling into his own blankets. "You too," Julia murmured, already drifting off. Jordan lay awake for a while, listening to the fire pop and settle. The cabin felt different somehow, less empty, more like the home it had once been, back when he'd shared it with his wife. But that was a memory he wasn't ready to face yet. Instead, he focused on the sound of Julia's steady breathing and the storm's lullaby until sleep finally claimed him, carrying him down into dreams of snow and silence and the possibility of healing. Morning light pierced through the narrow gaps between the cabin logs, painting thin golden lines across the wooden floor. Julia woke to the familiar scent of wood smoke and the soft sounds of Jordan stoking the breakfast fire. She sat up slowly, orienting herself in the space that was gradually becoming familiar. "Morning," Jordan said quietly, his boots scraping against the floorboards as he moved about. "Good morning," Julia replied, running her fingers along her blanket to find its edge. The air held the crisp bite of early mountain dawn, making her grateful for the growing warmth of the fire. She listened carefully as Jordan moved around the cabin, building a mental map of the space. His footsteps told her where things were: 12 paces from hearth to door, 8 paces to the table, 5 to the water bucket. Each sound helped her piece together the layout of her new sanctuary. Once dressed, Julia began exploring the cabin with careful touches. Her fingers traced the rough-hewn walls, finding the places where bark still clung to the logs. The table revealed its history through knife marks and smooth spots worn by years of use. Tools hung from pegs. She identified them by touch. Axe, saw, hammer, each in its proper place. "I'm heading to the creek for water," Jordan announced. "Fire's built up good. You'll be all right?" "Yes, thank you. I thought I might try making some cornbread while you're gone." Her fingers had found the flour bin and the smooth metal of the cooking implements. Jordan hesitated by the door. "You sure?" Julia smiled in his direction. "I've been cooking since I was a girl. Lost my sight, not my skills." She patted the stove confidently. "Though I may need help knowing when it's done." The door creaked open and shut as Jordan left. Julia set to work, measuring ingredients by touch and memory. The familiar motions brought comfort, sifting cornmeal through her fingers, feeling the right consistency of the batter. She'd done this hundreds of times before. The cabin filled with the warm scent of baking bread, but something wasn't quite right. Julia frowned, trying to gauge the heat of the stove. Without being able to see the color of the crust, it was harder than she'd expected. When Jordan returned, the sound of water sloshing in the bucket was accompanied by an unmistakable burnt smell. "Oh dear," Julia said, reaching for the pan with careful hands. "I'm afraid I've ruined it." "Here, let me," Jordan said quickly, taking the pan before she could burn herself. The silence stretched for a moment. Then Julia couldn't help herself. She laughed. The sound seemed to startle them both, bright and unexpected in the quiet cabin. "Well, she said, still chuckling. "I suppose I'll need more practice with your stove. It's hotter than I'm used to." To her surprise, she heard a soft chuckle in response. The first time she'd heard Jordan laugh. The sound transformed him, making him seem younger, lighter somehow. "We'll work on it together," he said, the smile still evident in his voice. "Got plenty of cornmeal." The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Julia explored a little more of her new world. Jordan taught her the paths between cabin and creek, smokehouse and woodpile, marking them with rope guidelines she could follow. She learned to identify the different birds by their calls, the harsh cry of pine jays, the gentle cooing of mourning doves, the sharp tap-tap-tap of woodpeckers. During the quiet afternoons, Julia shared the scripture verses stored in her heart. Her voice filled the cabin with ancient words of comfort as Jordan worked on mending harness or carving new axe handles. "The Lord is my shepherd," she would recite, her fingers moving as if reading invisible pages. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Jordan listened silently at first, but gradually began asking questions about particular verses, revealing a hunger for understanding that touched her deeply. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Julia taught him Psalm 23. His deep voice stumbled over the words at first, but grew more confident with practice. "He leadeth me beside the still waters," they said together, their voices blending in the fire-lit quiet. "He restoreth my soul." In return, Jordan taught her the language of the mountain wilderness. He helped her identify the different winds, the sharp bite of a north wind bringing snow, the gentle whisper of a western breeze carrying pine scent. He showed her how to tell time by the sun's warmth on her face and the changing songs of birds throughout the day. "Listen," he'd say softly, touching her arm to orient her toward a sound. "That's a fox barking down by the creek." Or, "Feel how the wind's shifted. Storm's coming. The firs sound different when snow's on the way." Julia found herself treasuring these quiet lessons, these moments when Jordan's natural reticence gave way to sharing his deep knowledge of the mountain world. His voice would grow animated when describing the land he loved, painting pictures she could see in her mind. But there were reminders that their peace was fragile. One morning, Jordan's boots crunched through fresh snow as he made his rounds of the property. When he returned, his voice was tight with concern. "Wolf tracks," he said shortly. "Circling the smokehouse. Need to keep a better watch." Julia heard him checking his rifle, the metallic clicks sharp in the morning quiet. She knew he wasn't just thinking about wolves. River's threat hung over them like storm clouds, invisible but heavy with potential violence. The evenings were their most peaceful time. After supper, they would sit by the fire, each occupied with small tasks, Julia knitting or mending, Jordan whittling or reading from the Bible the Reverend had given him. The companionable silence between them grew more comfortable with each passing day. One night, as the fire burned low, Julia heard Jordan's voice, so quiet she almost missed it. He was praying, his words meant for no ears but God's and his own. "Sarah," he whispered, and Julia's heart ached at the pain in that single word. "I miss you still, but I think maybe you sent me a sign. A reason to come back to living instead of just surviving." Julia sat very still, not wanting to interrupt this private moment. She heard him shift in his chair, heard the catch in his breath that might have been tears. Slowly, carefully, she reached out across the space between them. Her fingers found his hand, rough with calluses and work, and gently covered it with her own. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Jordan's hand turned beneath hers, his fingers curling around her palm with infinite gentleness. They sat like that, connected by that simple touch, while the fire crackled and night winds sang outside the cabin walls. Julia felt the tremor in his hand and understood what it cost this solitary man to accept comfort, to allow this small breach in the walls he'd built around his grief. She didn't speak, didn't try to fill the silence with words. Sometimes touch could say what words couldn't. "I understand. You're not alone. It's all right to remember. All right to heal." The fire settled lower, sending soft shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, an owl called once, twice, its voice carrying across the snow-hushed valley. Jordan's hand remained in hers, neither of them willing to break this fragile moment of connection. In that quiet hour, something shifted between them, the careful distance of rescuer and rescued giving way to something deeper, something built of shared solitude and gentle understanding. They were no longer simply protector and protected, but two souls finding their way back to trust, back to hope, one careful step at a time. When at last they bid each other good night, Julia lay awake for a long time, listening to the pop and settle of the dying fire. She thought about the strength it took to reach out after loss, to risk caring again. She thought about Jordan's quiet faith in doing what was right, even when it cost him his solitude and safety. And she thought about how healing sometimes came in unexpected ways, through burned cornbread and scripture verses, through shared silence, and the simple warmth of a hand reaching out in the darkness. Sleep finally found her, bringing dreams of gentle winds and quiet voices, of safety found in the most unexpected places. In his bedroll across the room, Jordan too drifted off, his hand still warm from her touch, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The mountain snow retreated slowly as spring crept up the valleys. Patches of bare ground emerged like islands in the melting white, bringing with them the first brave shoots of grass and early wildflowers. The air grew softer, carrying hints of green things awakening. Jordan kept to his routines, rising before dawn to check his trap lines and hunt. The elk were moving down from the high country, following the retreat of winter, and fresh meat would be welcome after months of salt pork and dried provisions. Julia found her own rhythms in the lengthening days. She'd discovered a talent for working with the strips of bark Jordan brought her, supple inner bark from cedar trees that could be separated into long fibers. Her sensitive fingers worked the strands together, twisting and plying them into sturdy cord. "My grandmother taught me this," she told Jordan one morning as she worked. "Said every bit of rope might save your life someday." Her hands moved steadily, never faltering despite her blindness. Course, she probably didn't reckon on me using the skill in a mountain cabin. Jordan paused in cleaning his rifle to watch her work. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." She was. Julia smiled at the memory. "Taught me most everything I know about making do with what's at hand." The morning passed peacefully. Jordan prepared to head out hunting, checking his powder and shot with practiced care. "Elk sign down in the lower meadow," he said. "Should be back before sundown." Julia nodded, her fingers still moving through the bark fibers. "I'll have supper waiting. Mind you don't get so caught up in tracking you forget to eat again." That earned her a soft chuckle. "Yes, ma'am." The cabin door creaked open and closed, and Julia listened to his footsteps crunching through the remaining patches of snow until they faded away. The afternoon settled into quiet. Julia worked her cord, humming old hymns to herself. The sun's warmth through the window told her it was past midday when she first heard it, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. She went still, her heart suddenly pounding. The sounds grew clearer. 2 horses, she thought, moving fast despite the muddy trail. Then a voice carried on the wind, harsh and familiar, making her blood run cold. "Julia! Where are you, woman?" River. She'd know that voice anywhere, rough with drink and rage. Julia rose quickly, her hands trembling as she felt her way to the door. She needed to get outside, to hear better where they were. "Tracks lead up this way," another voice, unfamiliar. "Fresh ones, too. Someone's living up here." "Damn mountain man," River snarled. "I'll kill him if he's touched her." Julia pressed herself against the cabin wall, heart hammering. They were still below the ridge, maybe half a mile down. River's voice carried clearly in the spring air. "Julia, you come out now, and maybe I won't beat you half to death." Quiet footsteps behind her made her jump, but a familiar hand touched her arm. "Jordan," she breathed in relief. "Inside," he whispered, quick and quiet. He guided her back into the cabin, his movements swift and silent. Julia heard him lift the trap door to the root cellar, a small space dug beneath the cabin floor where he stored winter vegetables and dried goods. "Down here," he murmured. "Stay quiet no matter what you hear." Julia descended the rough ladder, the earthen walls close around her. Jordan squeezed her shoulder once, then she heard him close the trap door above. Dirt sifted down as he pulled a rug over it. She crouched in the darkness, straining to hear. Jordan's footsteps moved away, then silence. The root cellar smelled of earth and old potatoes, the air cool and damp. Julia wrapped her arms around herself, trying to still her trembling. Above, she could hear the hoofbeats growing closer, then voices. "Empty cabin," the stranger's voice said. "But someone's living here, smoke in the chimney still." "Search the valley," River commanded. "That trapper's around here somewhere, and my wife with him." Julia recognized the slur in his words. River always drank heavily when his temper was up. She pressed her hands together, praying silently. The voices grew fainter as the horses moved away. Still, Julia didn't move, remembering Jordan's warning. Minutes stretched like hours in the close darkness. Finally, the trap door creaked open. "They're gone," Jordan said softly. "Rode down toward the South Valley." He helped her up the ladder, his hands steady and sure. Julia was shaking, she realized, not just from fear, but from anger. "That was Blaine with him," Jordan said as he closed the trap door. "Bad sort. Works the lower trap line sometimes." "I won't go back." The words burst from Julia with sudden force. "I won't live under his hand again, Jordan. I'd sooner—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "Here," Jordan said quietly. "Sit by the fire." She heard him adding wood to the coals, felt the warmth growing as flames caught. Outside, the wind was rising, bringing with it the first drops of rain. "I tried to be a good wife," Julia said after a long moment, even after he started drinking heavy. "Told myself it was just the mind failing that he'd come around. But the beatings got worse. He'd quote scripture at me while he did it, said the good book gave him the right." Her hands clenched in her lap, as if God meant his word to be used as a whip. Thunder rolled across the valley, closer now. The spring storm was building, wind rattling the cabin's shutters. "I've seen men like River," Jordan said, his voice low and harsh. "They twist everything good until it serves their cruelty, even faith." "I was so afraid," Julia whispered. "For so long, but I'm more afraid of going back. I'd rather—" She swallowed hard. "I'd rather die free than live as his property again." Jordan's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "Julia." His voice was quiet but fierce. "Listen to me. You won't go back, ever. I swear it." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just protection anymore. It was a vow. Lightning flashed outside, thunder following close behind. The storm was directly overhead now, rain drumming on the cabin roof. But Julia felt something ease in her chest, some knot of fear loosening at Jordan's words. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk so much for me?" There was a long pause, broken only by the storm's voice. When Jordan finally spoke, his words were careful, measured. "Because it's right," he said. "Because no one deserves to live in fear. Because—" He stopped, then continued more quietly. "Because you showed me there's still good worth fighting for in this world." Julia reached out, found his hand where it rested on the arm of his chair. His fingers curled around hers, warm and calloused. They sat like that as the storm raged outside, each lost in thought. The fire crackled, sending up sparks. Wind howled around the cabin corners, and rain lashed the windows. But inside, in that moment of shared understanding, Julia felt safer than she had in years. She knew River would return, knew that this peace they'd found couldn't last forever. The storm outside echoed the tension building in their lives, the growing conflict between Jordan's promise of protection and the deeper feelings neither of them dared name. But for now, in the fire-lit quiet, with Jordan's hand steady in hers, Julia let herself believe in the possibility of freedom. Let herself trust in the strength of a good man's word. The storm moved on, eventually, as storms do. But Jordan's vow remained, solid as the mountains themselves. "You won't go back, ever. I swear it." They sat together through the last rumbles of thunder, neither speaking, both understanding that everything had changed. The line between protector and protected had blurred into something else, something neither of them had expected to find in this remote cabin, in this wild corner of the world. Outside, the spring rain continued to fall, washing winter's last traces from the land, making way for new growth, new beginnings. Inside, two people who had thought themselves beyond hope found their hearts awakening to possibilities they had long ago abandoned. The morning dawned gray and threatening, heavy clouds dragging low across the mountain peaks. Jordan stood at the cabin door, studying the sky with concern. The air had that peculiar stillness that often preceded a major storm, and the temperature was dropping fast. "Feels like snow coming," he said, mostly to himself. "Big snow." Julia paused in her work at the table, where she was sorting dried beans by touch. "How can you tell?" "The way the wind died, the birds gone quiet." He inhaled deeply. That sharp smell in the air like metal and ice mixed together. As if confirming his words, the first flakes began to fall, fat and wet. Within minutes, the gentle snowfall transformed into driving sheets of white, carried on a wind that had suddenly returned with vengeful force. Jordan moved quickly, gathering armloads of firewood from the stack by the door and bringing them inside. The temperature was plummeting, and the wind had shifted to the north, a sure sign this wasn't just a passing squall. "Best get everything we might need inside," he said, making another trip. "This feels like a 3-day blow coming." Julia rose to help, but he guided her back to her chair. "Stay warm. I'll manage." The next hour was filled with the sounds of preparation, wood being stacked, water brought in from the creek, preserved foods retrieved from the storehouse. The wind grew stronger with each passing minute, howling around the cabin's corners and rattling the shutters. By midday, the storm had become a full blizzard. Snow drove horizontally past the windows, and drifts were already building against the cabin's walls. The chimney groaned eerily as the wind tore across its top, creating a sound like a wounded animal. "That don't sound good," Julia said, her face turned toward the noise. "It'll hold," Jordan assured her, though his own expression was worried. "Built it myself, extra thick." They settled into what would become their routine for the next 3 days. Jordan kept the fire fed constantly, while Julia helped prepare their carefully rationed meals. The woodpile diminished faster than he'd hoped, and he began to eye their food supplies with growing concern. On the second day, as the storm showed no signs of weakening, Jordan made a decision. He took his old Colt revolver from its place above the mantel and sat beside Julia at the table. "Need to teach you something," he said quietly. The pistol made a solid thunk as he set it on the wooden surface. "In case I don't come back from the woodpile someday." Julia's hands stilled in her lap. "Jordan, just listen." His voice was gentle but firm. "Feel this first. Careful now. It's loaded." He guided her hands over the weapon, letting her fingers explore its shape. "This here's the barrel. Always keep it pointed away from yourself or anyone else. Here's the trigger guard, and inside it, the trigger. Don't touch that until you're ready to shoot." Slowly, methodically, he taught her how to check if the cylinder was loaded, how to cock the hammer, how to aim using the front sight as a reference point. Julia listened intently, her fingers moving with careful precision as she learned the pistol's mechanics. "But I can't see to aim," she said finally. "At close range you won't need to. Just point it toward the sound and squeeze smooth." He paused. "I pray you never need this knowledge, but better to have it and not need it." The lesson was interrupted by a particularly violent gust that made the whole cabin shudder. Snow had piled halfway up the window now, and the roof creaked ominously under its growing burden. That evening, with the storm still raging outside, they sat close to the fire. The enforced confinement had created an intimacy neither had expected, and stories began to flow more freely between them. "Tell me about before," Jordan said quietly. "Your life before River." Julia's fingers moved slowly over her cup of tea. "We had orchards," she said after a moment. "My father's pride, apple trees mostly, some pear. I remember the smell of blossoms in spring, so sweet it made you dizzy." She smiled softly. "I used to climb those trees, even after I lost my sight. Knew every branch by heart." "What happened to the orchards?" "Drought came. Then father died, and mother couldn't manage alone. River showed up right then, all charm and promises." Her voice hardened slightly. "Sold the land first thing after we married. Said mining was the future." Jordan was quiet for a long moment. The fire popped and sparked, sending shadows dancing across the walls. "My Sarah loved gardens," he said finally, his voice low. "Had the sweetest patch of flowers you ever saw, right outside our first cabin. Used to say she was growing beauty in the wilderness." Julia turned toward his voice. "Tell me about her. About what happened." The wind howled outside as Jordan gathered his thoughts. "We were checking trap lines. Storm came up sudden like this one. Sarah saw the snow starting to slide before I did." He stopped, his voice rough. "She pushed me behind a boulder, saved my life. But the avalanche—" He couldn't continue. Julia reached across the space between them, found his hand. Her touch was warm, compassionate. "She must have loved you very much." "Been alone since then. Seemed safer that way." He looked at their joined hands. "Until now." The third day dawned with the storm beginning to weaken. The roof had been creaking all night, the weight of snow making the logs protest. Jordan had slept little, watching for signs of structural failure. Finally, by mid-morning, the clouds began to break. Sunlight pierced through in bright shafts, making the snow-covered landscape blindingly white. The wind died to occasional gusts, and an eerie silence fell over the mountain. "Storm's breaking," Jordan announced, relief evident in his voice. Need to dig us out before the snow freezes solid." It took him most of an hour to clear the door enough to push it open. The snow had drifted nearly to the roof on one side of the cabin, and the cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped out. That's when he saw them. The tracks. Half filled with fresh snow but still visible, boot prints in the snow circling the cabin. Big prints, made by someone during the height of the storm. They led to each window, where the snow was disturbed as if someone had tried to peer inside. Jordan's blood ran cold. He knew those boots, had seen River wearing them in town. "Julia," he called, trying to keep his voice steady. "Come out here a moment." He helped her navigate through the snow until they stood by the tracks. Guiding her hand down, he let her feel the impression in the snow. "Someone was here," she whispered. "During the storm?" "River," Jordan confirmed grimly. "Must have followed our trail before the snow covered it. Storm caught him up here." Julia sank to her knees beside the tracks, her face lifted toward the newly cleared sky. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered. "Thank you for the storm that kept him from us, for the snow that turned him back." Jordan watched her pray, but his mind was racing. River had found them once. He'd find them again. And next time, there might not be a blizzard to drive him away. The danger wouldn't end until River did. The thought settled in Jordan's mind like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples of consequence through his consciousness. He looked at Julia, kneeling in the snow, and knew with crushing certainty that there could be no peace for her, for either of them, while River lived. The sun climbed higher, making the snow-covered landscape sparkle like diamonds. But Jordan barely noticed its beauty. His mind was already turning to what must come next, what choices lay before them. The tracks in the snow were more than just footprints. They were a promise of violence to come. The mountain thaw came slowly, like a tired giant stretching after long sleep. Patches of bare ground emerged between melting snowdrifts, dark soil drinking in the strengthening sunlight. Jordan watched the changing season with practiced eyes, noting how the creek's ice thinned and the first brave shoots pushed through winter's blanket. One crisp morning, he found Julia standing on the cabin's south-facing slope, her face lifted to catch the warmth. Her fingers trailed through the air, testing its softness. "Feels like planting weather," she said, smiling. "The soil's waking up. I can smell it." Jordan watched her certainty with quiet wonder. "Reckon you're right. Ground's about ready for early crops." He paused, considering. "Could show you how, if you'd like." Julia's face brightened. "You'd teach me to garden up here?" "Why not? Soil's good enough for beans and potatoes. Onions, too, if we can get sets." He moved beside her, taking her hand to guide it to the earth. "Feel that? Still cold underneath, but the top's warming nicely." Together they spent the morning preparing a small plot. Jordan showed her how to judge depth by touch, guiding her fingers to make furrows the right size. He described each seed's shape and size so she could identify them by feel. The smooth roundness of pea seeds, the smaller beans, the wrinkled surface of potato eyes cut for planting. "Like this?" Julia asked, carefully spacing bean seeds along a row. "Perfect," Jordan affirmed. "You've got a natural touch for it." She laughed, a sound that had become more frequent lately, like spring birds returning. "My father always said I had farmer's hands, even after—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Even after losing my sight, I could still feel what the plants needed." Each dawn after that found Julia insisting on reading from her treasured Bible before they started the day's work. She'd run her fingers over the raised letters of her special copy of the Gospel of John, her voice clear in the morning air. "The light shines in the darkness," she read one morning, "and the darkness has not overcome it." Her fingers paused on the page. That's why I love reading this at sunrise. Light finds its way even through blindness, don't you think? Jordan, who had initially been uncertain about the daily readings, found himself drawn to the quiet ritual. There was something healing in Julia's unwavering faith, in the way she found hope in ancient words while coaxing new life from the soil. Their days fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings began with scripture and planting, afternoons with Jordan teaching Julia the cabin's surrounding paths. She learned to navigate by sound and touch, the different textures of tree bark, the way wind changed pitch between rocks, the splashing patterns of the creek. One particularly fine morning, their peace was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Jordan tensed, reaching for his rifle, but the rider's approach was unhurried, open. "That you, Jordan Hale?" a voice called from the trail. "Henry Two Rivers, from the old trading days." Jordan relaxed slightly, recognizing the Ute scout he'd known years before. "Come on up, Henry. Been a while?" Henry rode into view on a paint horse, his manner casual, but his eyes taking in everything. The freshly turned garden soil, Julia standing in the doorway, Jordan's protective stance. "Good to see you settled somewhat," Henry said, dismounting. His voice carried warmth but also concern. "Though you might want to know, there's talk down in the mining camp." Julia stepped forward, her face turned toward Henry's voice. "What kind of talk?" Henry's expression softened as he noted her unseeing eyes and the faded bruise near her temple. "Ma'am, you'd be the wife River Crane's been raging about?" "Former wife," Jordan said firmly, moving closer to Julia. Henry nodded. "Well, that's part of what brings me. River's been at the mining camp, drunk and boasting about some land deal he's fixing to make. Spring parcel near Pikes Creek, he says. Claims it's his free and clear to sell." Julia's face went pale. "That's my father's land. The last piece he didn't sell before he died. River stole it when we married, forged my name on the deed." Her hands trembled slightly. "It's all that's left of home." "Thought it might be something like that," Henry said quietly. "He's looking to sell it to the mining company. They're aiming to dam the creek, flood the whole valley for their operations." Jordan watched Julia's face crumple with grief and anger. He had seen that land during his trading days, a beautiful valley with rich soil and clear springs. The thought of it being drowned under mine tailings made his jaw clench. "The law might listen now," Henry continued. "If you can prove the deed was forged. River's been careless, bragging when he's in his cups. Right witnesses might step forward." Julia's hands worked in her apron. "All the original papers are in Father's strongbox. River never found it. I hid it under the hearthstones before." She took a steadying breath. "Before things got bad." Jordan and Henry exchanged looks. The implications were clear. The proof existed, but retrieving it meant returning to the place where River had hurt her. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Jordan said finally. "Need to know what we're facing." Henry mounted his horse. "I'll keep my ears open at the mining camp. River's there most days now, trying to push the sale through quick." He turned to Julia. "Don't worry, ma'am. Creator has a way of bringing truth to light." After Henry rode away, Jordan and Julia sat in the doorway, listening to the spring wind in the pines. The peace of their morning felt distant now, overshadowed by the weight of decision. "I have to go," Jordan said softly. "Need to know what we're up against." Julia reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "I know, but promise me something?" "Name it." "Be back before dark." Her voice held equal measures of fear and determination. "I can manage fine here. You taught me well. but promise you'll return before sunset." Jordan squeezed her hand. "You'll have the rifle. Remember how to load it?" "Yes, though I pray I won't need to." "Amen to that." He helped her up, noting how she'd grown stronger during her weeks at the cabin. The fearful woman from town was becoming someone new, someone who planted gardens in rocky soil and read scripture in the dawn light. That evening, they sat by the fire making plans. Jordan would leave at first light, riding the back trails Henry had mentioned to avoid being seen. Julia would tend the garden and keep the cabin secure, the rifle close at hand. "When this is done," Julia said softly, "I want to use Father's land right. Plant orchards again, like the ones I remember. Make something good grow there." Jordan watched her face in the firelight, seeing the hope that lived alongside her fear. "We will," he promised. "Together." They stayed up late, neither wanting to face the separation ahead. Julia read more from John's Gospel, her fingers sure on the pages. "The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Jordan saddled his horse, while Julia packed him food for the journey. Bread she'd baked herself, dried meat, a jar of fresh spring water. "Remember," he said, checking his pistol and saddlebags one last time. "Stay inside if you hear riders. Henry might return, but he'll call out first. Anyone else?" "I know," she assured him. "I'll be fine, just—" She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle. "Just come back safe." Jordan caught her hand, pressed it briefly to his heart. "Before dark, I promise." He mounted and turned toward town, the morning sun at his back. Behind him, Julia stood in the doorway, one hand on the rifle, the other raised in farewell. The garden they'd planted together caught the early light, tiny green shoots reaching toward heaven. Jordan rode with purpose, his mind on the task ahead, but his heart back at the cabin with Julia. He knew the risks of leaving her alone, but they couldn't hide forever. Sometimes truth had to be faced in the light of day. The trail down the mountain was clear now, spring having melted the last patches of snow. New grass sprouted in sunny patches, and somewhere a meadowlark trilled its morning song. It was good weather for riding, good weather for hope. But Jordan kept his eyes sharp and his gun close. River was out there somewhere, probably watching the trails. The time for confrontation was coming, as surely as spring had come to the mountains. The only question was whether truth and justice would bloom alongside Julia's garden or wither in the shadow of River's Gride. Jordan's horse picked its way down the mountain trail as morning stretched toward noon. The gelding's hooves kicked loose stones that clattered into the ravine below, marking their descent into Leadville. Through gaps in the pines, Jordan could see the town sprawled in the valley, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. The streets were busier than his last visit. Miners crowded the boardwalks, their voices raised in heated discussion. The telegraph office's key clicked steadily, a rhythmic counterpoint to the general chaos. Jordan tied his horse at the hitching post, noting how the men's arguments centered around water rights and mining claims. "Tell you what," one burly miner declared, "that new dam's gonna change everything. Whole valley's gonna be underwater by summer's end." His companion spat tobacco juice into the street. "If they can get the rights sorted. Heard there's some dispute about that spring parcel." Jordan kept his face neutral as he passed them, though his heart quickened. He pushed open the door to the land office, a bell jingling overhead. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, glanced up from his ledger. "Help you?" the clerk asked, adjusting his spectacles. "Need to see the records for the Pikes Creek spring parcel," Jordan said quietly. "Property originally belonging to Thomas Crane." The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. That's been a popular piece of paper lately. River Crane was in just yesterday with the mining company man. He shuffled through a stack of documents. Trying to push the sale through quick, he was. Jordan leaned against the counter, keeping his voice level. That so? Here we are. The clerk pulled out several sheets. Deed of sale from Thomas Crane to his daughter Julia, then transfer of ownership to River Crane upon marriage, and now, he squinted at a fresh document. Proposed sale to the Rocky Mountain Mining Corporation. Let me see Julia's signature on that transfer, Jordan said. The clerk hesitated. Well, sir, that's not exactly. Please. Jordan met the man's eyes. It's important. Something in Jordan's expression made the clerk swallow hard. He laid out the document, pointing to a shaky signature at the bottom. River brought this in himself, the clerk admitted, lowering his voice. Said his wife was indisposed. But between you and me, he glanced around the empty office. I knew Julia before her marriage, taught her in Sunday school. Even after she lost her sight, she had the neatest hand you ever saw. Muscle memory, she called it. He tapped the crude signature. This ain't her writing. Jordan studied the forged signature, anger burning in his chest. I need a copy of this record, official, with your seal. Sir, I don't know if I should. That man beat his blind wife in the street, Jordan said softly. Stole her land and now aims to sell it for whiskey money. You know it's wrong. The clerk's shoulders sagged. Give me a few minutes. He began carefully copying the documents, including River's crude forgery. I could lose my position for this. You're doing right by the law, Jordan said. True law, not whatever River's twisted to his purpose. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Jordan looked through the window at clouds building over the mountains. The clerk worked quickly, his pen scratching across fresh paper. There's something else you should know, the clerk said as he pressed his seal into red wax. River was in here ranting about heading up to your cabin, said he had business to settle. The clerk handed over the copied documents. He wasn't alone. Jordan's blood ran cold. When? Left town 2 hours ago, maybe 3. Him and that trapper, Blaine. The clerk wouldn't meet his eyes. They were carrying rifles. Jordan was moving before the man finished speaking. He burst out of the office into afternoon shadows, clouds darkening overhead. The first drops of rain struck the boardwalk as he untied his horse. God, he whispered, swinging into the saddle, I know I ain't talked to you proper in years, but please. His horse wheeled toward the mountain trail. Please let me not be too late. The storm hit as they climbed, rain turning to stinging hail. Jordan bent low over his horse's neck, pushing the animal harder than was wise on the treacherous path. Thunder cracked overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged fingers. Through the curtain of hail, Jordan caught glimpses of the ridge where his cabin lay. His heart stopped. Smoke rose from the chimney. Far too much smoke, billowing black against the storm clouds. Not the tidy smoke of a cooking fire, or even a chimney blaze. This was the smoke of destruction. Faster, he urged his horse, though the poor beast was already giving its all. The gelding's flanks heaved as they climbed the last switchback. Jordan's prayers became desperate fragments carried away by the wind. The trail straightened toward home. Through the trees, Jordan saw flickering orange light where his cabin should be. The smoke was thicker now, rolling down the slope like a living thing. His horse shied at the smell of burning wood. Another flash of lightning illuminated the scene in stark detail. Jordan's cabin was ablaze, flames licking through the roof. 2 horses stood in the rain nearby. He recognized River's paint and Blaine's old mule. But where was Julia? Jordan drew his pistol as he rode closer, scanning for movement. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the thunder still rolled overhead. He dismounted behind a stand of pines, moving forward on foot. A shot cracked out. Splinters flew from a tree near Jordan's head. He dove behind a boulder as another bullet whined past. "That's close enough, mountain man." River's voice carried through the storm. "You took something of mine. Now I'm taking something of yours." Jordan's heart hammered. He couldn't see Julia anywhere. The cabin's door hung open, flames visible inside. Had they dragged her away? Was she still inside that inferno? "Where is she?" Jordan shouted back, trying to locate River's position. Laughter answered him. Cruel, whiskey-rough laughter. "Oh, she's safe enough. Locked up nice and tight in your root cellar. Figured we'd let her listen while everything burns. Maybe she'll learn some respect." Relief flooded Jordan's chest, followed immediately by rage. The root cellar was stone-lined, dug into the hillside. Julia would be scared, but alive. For now, he had to get to her. But first he had to deal with River and Blaine. The rain was picking up again, which might help douse the cabin. But it also made it harder to hear movement. Another shot rang out, closer this time. They were trying to pin him down. Jordan counted his ammunition, 6 shots in the pistol, plus the rifle on his saddle if he could reach it. He had to make them count. Through the smoke and rain, Jordan caught a glimpse of movement. Blaine, trying to circle behind him. The trapper had never been much of a woodsman, crashing through the brush like a wounded elk. Jordan waited until he had a clear shot. His pistol barked once. Blaine yelped and dropped his rifle, clutching his shoulder. The trapper scrambled back toward the burning cabin. "You'll pay for that," River shouted. A wild shot kicked up mud near Jordan's feet. Jordan worked his way from boulder to tree, moving closer to the root cellar. He could hear Julia now, pounding on the heavy doors, calling his name. The sound drove him forward, past caution. Another bullet sparked off stone beside him. Jordan returned fire, forcing River to duck behind the cabin's corner. The burning building cast weird shadows through the rain, making it hard to track movement. "Julia," Jordan called. "I'm coming. Stay down." "Jordan, be careful." Her voice was muffled but strong. "River's got—" Her warning was cut off by more gunfire. Jordan counted the shots. River had to be running low on ammunition, unless he had Jordan's own rifle from inside the cabin. The thought had barely formed when a shot boomed out, the distinctive sound of his Winchester. Splinters exploded from the pine tree Jordan had just passed. "Like my new rifle?" River called. "Found it hanging right over your fireplace. Mighty hospitable of you." Jordan pressed himself against a boulder, mind racing. River had the advantage of firepower now, and Jordan was down to 4 pistol shots. But he also knew these woods, every shadow and hollow. And he had something River didn't, a reason beyond hate to see this through. The rain grew heavier, drumming on the leaves overhead. Steam rose where it hit the burning cabin. Through it all, Jordan could hear Julia's prayers carrying from the root cellar, stronger than the storm. Jordan crept forward through the rain-soaked brush, every sense alert. The cabin's flames cast wild shadows across the clearing, and steam hissed where the downpour met. Burning wood. Through the chaos, he caught sight of movement near the root cellar. River, pacing like a caged animal, Jordan's Winchester cradled in his arms. "Come on out, mountain man," River's voice cracked with drink and rage. "Or maybe I'll just leave your blind woman down there till the smoke gets her." Jordan's fingers tightened on his pistol. 4 bullets left. He had to make them count. The rain plastered his shirt to his skin as he worked his way around the edge of the clearing, using the smoke for cover. A sharp crack split the air. Not gunfire, but the sound of splintering wood. Jordan's heart stopped as he saw Julia emerge from the root cellar, her dress mudded and torn. She must have found the loose board he'd meant to fix, the one that led to the old mining tunnel. "River," she called out, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "This ends now." Jordan saw River spin toward her voice, rifle raising. But Julia wasn't empty-handed. She held Jordan's old Colt, the one he'd taught her to load by touch. She pointed it in River's general direction, though her aim wavered. "Put it down, wife," River snarled. "You'll just hurt yourself." Jordan burst from cover, pistol raised. "Drop the rifle, River!" River's head snapped toward him, then back to Julia. A cruel smile twisted his face as he seemed to realize his advantage. "Well, now, ain't this something? The blind woman and her protector." He kept the Winchester trained on Julia. "Question is, Mountain Man, can you shoot me before I shoot her?" "You won't shoot anyone," Julia said, her hands steadied on the Colt. "The Lord sees what you've done, River. Every blow, every cruel word." "The Lord?" River laughed, the sound ugly and sharp. "Where was he when I lost everything in that mine collapse? Where was he when I had to marry a blind woman just to get my hands on her daddy's spring?" Jordan took a careful step forward. "Put the rifle down. It's over." "Over?" River's eyes were fever-bright in the firelight. "It ain't over till I say—" He lunged toward Julia, Winchester swinging. Jordan's warning shot kicked up snow beside River's feet. The man stumbled, and Jordan closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. They collided hard, the rifle flying from River's grasp. Jordan's pistol went spinning into the slush as River's fist connected with his jaw. They grappled in the mud, trading wild punches. River fought like a cornered wolf, all desperation and fury. "Stop it!" Julia cried. "Please!" River's boot caught Jordan in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. But Jordan had years of mountain strength behind him. He caught River's next punch and twisted, using the man's momentum to throw him face first into the mud. River came up spitting dirt and blood. "I'll kill you both!" He reached into his coat and steel glinted in the firelight, a long-bladed knife. "Jordan, he's armed." Julia's warning carried over the storm. River slashed wildly. Jordan jumped back, feeling the blade whisper past his chest. They circled each other in the rain, boots sliding in the mud. The knife darted out again and again, keeping Jordan at bay. "You think you're better than me?" River's words came in ragged gasps. "Think you can steal my wife, my land?" "The land was never yours," Jordan said. "Neither was she." River roared and charged. Jordan sidestepped, grabbing River's knife arm. They crashed together, wrestling for control of the blade. Jordan felt it slice across his forearm before he smashed his forehead into River's nose. The knife fell. Jordan kicked it away and drove his fist into River's stomach, then his jaw. The smaller man staggered but wouldn't go down. His hands clawed at Jordan's throat. Jordan broke the grip and struck again, putting all his weight behind the blow. River's head snapped back. He swayed once, eyes rolling up, then collapsed into the mud. The storm's fury seemed to fade with him, leaving only the soft patter of rain and the crackle of the dying fire. Julia stumbled toward the sound of their breathing. "Jordan? Here." He caught her before she could trip over River's unconscious form. She fell against his chest, shoulders shaking with sobs of fear and relief. "I thought, when I heard the shots—" She pressed her face into his shirt. "I thought he'd killed you." "I'm here," Jordan said softly. "You're safe now." He held her close, feeling her tremors slowly ease. The rain was gentle now, washing away blood and mud. The sound of hoofbeats made them both tense, but it was Henry who appeared through the trees, bow at ready. The Ute scout took in the scene. The smoldering cabin, River sprawled in the mud, Jordan and Julia embracing. "I saw the smoke," Henry said. "Came as fast as I could." He dismounted smoothly. "You need help with him?" He nodded toward River. Jordan reluctantly released Julia. "Need to get him to the sheriff, though law don't often side with those who need it most." "The law may not," Henry said, "but truth has its own power." He pulled rope from his saddlebags. "I will testify to what I've seen. The forged papers, the violence, the burning of your home." Together they bound River's hands and feet. The man moaned but didn't wake as they lifted him onto Henry's horse. "I'll watch over Miss Julia," Henry said. "Get him down the mountain before he comes around proper." Jordan turned to Julia, who stood straight despite her ordeal. "I'll be back by noon tomorrow." She reached for his hand, fingers finding the cuts and scrapes. "Be careful. He's dangerous, even in defeat." "I will." He squeezed her hand gently. "Henry will keep you safe." The first light of dawn was breaking as Jordan led his horse and Henry's mount down the muddy trail. River slumped across the saddle. The storm had passed, leaving the mountain air clean and sharp. Behind him, he could hear Henry and Julia talking softly as they assessed the cabin's damage. Jordan's body ached from the fight, but his mind was clear. River would face the sheriff, and whatever justice came would have to be enough. Vengeance might have been sweeter, but Jordan had chosen a different path, one that led back up the mountain, where Julia waited. The sun rose fully as he reached the switchback, painting the valley in shades of gold and promise. Somewhere up ahead, he knew, lay a future worth building. But first, he had to deliver this broken man to whatever mercy the law might offer. The Leadville jail smelled of stale tobacco and wet leather. Jordan sat on the wooden bench, watching through iron bars as Sheriff Wade locked River in the cell across from him. River's face was a mess of bruises, but his eyes burned with vengeful fire. "You're both staying put till we sort this out," the sheriff said, keys jingling as he checked the locks. He turned to Jordan, voice low and weighted with warning. "Though I reckon he'll walk free. You, mountain man? Maybe not." Jordan said nothing. The charge sheet on Wade's desk read clear enough. Assault, kidnapping, interference with a man's property. His stomach turned at that last one, as if Julia were no more than a chair or plow horse. River pressed against his bars, grinning through split lips. "Tell them, lawman. Tell them how this trapper stole my wife, living in sin up there in his cabin, turning her against me with devil's whispers." "Shut your mouth, Crane," the sheriff growled. "Save it for the judge." But River was working himself up, voice rising for the gathered crowd outside. "Adultery, that's what it is. A God-fearing husband trying to save his wife from a mountain devil." Jordan closed his eyes, letting the lies wash over him like creek water. He remembered Julia's quiet strength as she'd stood against River's rage. No devil's whisper could have given her that courage. Only truth could do that. Night fell slow and heavy. The jail grew quiet, except for River's occasional muttered threats. Jordan knelt by his cot, hands clasped as he hadn't done in years. The weight of prayer felt strange yet familiar, like picking up an old tool. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't ask for myself. But that woman trusted me to protect her. Don't let man's law undo what your law says is right." Boots scraped outside his cell. Reverend Coulter stood there, Bible tucked under one arm. His weathered face was kind in the lamplight. "Brought you some supper," the preacher said, passing a tin plate through the bars. "And some hope, if you'll take it." Jordan accepted the plate, but left it untouched. "What hope? Law sides with husbands." "Law's just men's writing," Coulter said. "God's truth walks slow, but it walks sure, Remember that." Through the barred window, Jordan could hear miners gathering at the saloon across the street. Their laughter carried sharp and mocking. "There sits the mountain fool, fighting for another man's wife. Should have stuck to trapping bears, easier than women." Coulter's hand gripped Jordan's shoulder through the bars. "Don't let their words shake you, son. Truth's got its own time." Dawn came with fresh commotion. Jordan woke to horses in the street and Henry's calm voice speaking to the sheriff. Then familiar footsteps approached his cell, lighter than a man's, certain despite their owner's darkness. "Julia?" Jordan stood, heart pounding. "You shouldn't be here." She wore a clean dress, her hair neatly braided, though exhaustion lined her face. "Henry brought me down. I've come to testify." "It's dangerous," Jordan said. "River cannot hurt me anymore." Her blind eyes seemed to find him through the bars. "I won't let fear silence truth again." River's voice rose from his cell. "Julia, come back to me, wife. I forgive you." She didn't flinch. "The only forgiveness needed is from God, River, for what you've done to us both." Henry appeared beside her, his presence steady as mountain stone. "The judge arrives at noon. I will speak of what I've seen. The forged papers, the violence, the burning cabin." Jordan watched Julia's face in the morning light. Despite the long ride down, despite River's threats and the town's judgment, hope lived in her expression. It kindled something in his own chest, a flicker of faith that truth might yet speak louder than rumor. "Whatever happens," she said softly, reaching through the bars to find his hand, "know that you did right by me, Jordan Hale. God sees that, even if men don't." Her fingers were warm against his calloused palm. He held them gently, feeling the strength beneath their softness. Whatever the judge might decide, this moment of quiet courage would stay with him always. "The court will convene soon," Henry said. "I'll keep her safe until then." Jordan watched them go, Julia's hand on Henry's arm, as he guided her through the crowded street. The miner's mockery had fallen silent before her dignity. Even the sheriff looked thoughtful as he checked the cell locks one final time. Truth walked slow, the preacher had said, but it walked sure. Jordan settled onto his bench to wait, prayer in his heart, and Julia's touch still warm upon his hand. The courthouse buzzed with whispers as townsfolk filled every wooden bench. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Julia stood at the witness stand, her face partially hidden behind a dark veil, her hand resting on Henry's steady arm as he guided her forward. When she spoke, her voice carried clear and unwavering through the hushed room. "River beat me that day in the street," she testified, "and many days before. Jordan Hale showed me kindness when others turned away. He gave me shelter but never once crossed the bounds of honor." River lurched to his feet, face mottled red. "Lies! She's been poisoned against me." "Order." The judge's gavel cracked sharp as a gunshot. "One more outburst, Mr. Crane, and you'll be removed." The clerk approached with documents in hand. "Your Honor, I have here the deed River Crane attempted to file." He laid out 2 papers side by side. "And here is the original deed, signed in Julia's maiden name before their marriage." Julia's fingers traced the raised seal on her father's deed. "This is the true one. River forged my name on the other." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jordan bowed his head, fighting back tears as he watched Julia stand firm in her truth. Reverend Coulter took the stand last, his testimony measured and clear. "I've witnessed River Crane's deceptions firsthand. This good woman sought sanctuary in God's house, bearing the marks of his cruelty." "Court will recess for 1 hour. the judge announced, as thunder rumbled outside the courthouse windows. Thunder cracked like a rifle shot as River burst through the courthouse doors, his face twisted with rage. The deputy's stolen pistol gleamed in his trembling hand. "Hail!" River's scream echoed off the walls. "This ends now!" Julia's cry pierced the air as River fired wildly. Bullets splintered wooden beams overhead, sending splinters raining down. Townsfolk dove for cover as Jordan launched himself across the room, his body slamming into River with bone-crushing force. Both men crashed against the judge's raised bench, wrestling for control of the weapon. A blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening boom that shook the courthouse to its foundation. The weakened roof timbers, already damaged by River's shots, gave way with a terrible groan. Beams and planks crashed down in a cloud of dust and debris. When the dust began to settle, River lay motionless beneath a massive timber, his body crushed. Jordan was pinned nearby, blood trickling from his forehead, but his chest still rose with shallow breaths. Julia crawled through the wreckage on hands and knees, guided by Jordan's labored breathing. "Jordan," she whispered, her fingers finding his face. "I'm here." Townspeople rushed forward through the settling dust, working together to lift the debris off Jordan's legs. Rain poured through the gaping hole in the roof and broken windows, streaming across the courthouse floor. The water mixed with blood and ash, carrying away the last traces of River's bitter rage as thunder rolled in the distance. Jordan's eyes fluttered open in the mission infirmary 5 days after the courthouse collapse. Sunlight filtered through muslin curtains, casting a gentle glow across the narrow bed. Julia sat beside him, her warm hand wrapped around his calloused fingers. The familiar scent of lamp oil and fresh-baked bread filled the air. Reverend Coulter stepped quietly to the bedside, his weathered Bible tucked under one arm. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said softly. "River didn't survive the collapse. The judge ruled yesterday. Julia keeps her father's land, free and clear. All charges against you have been dropped." Jordan squeezed Julia's hand, his throat tight with emotion. The Reverend continued. "Folks in town see things different now. They witnessed Julia's courage in that courtroom. Respect has replaced the old gossip." When Jordan could finally stand without wavering, he announced his intention to return to his cabin in the mountains. Julia's face brightened with a knowing smile. "Then I'll need a ride home," she said simply. They left Leadville as dawn broke over the peaks. Their wagon creaked under a gentle spring rain, wheels cutting fresh tracks in the muddy road. Reverend Coulter stood at the mission gate, raising his hand in blessing as they passed. "Go with God," he called after them. Julia's face turned toward the morning sun, peace written across her features. Jordan clicked to the horses, steering them toward the high country and home. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and fresh-turned earth as Jordan and Julia's wagon rolled up to the cabin. Henry stood by the gate, pride evident in his gentle smile. He had done more than watch over their home. He had transformed it. "Roof's strong now," Henry said, gesturing to the new cedar shakes. "Garden's fenced too, kept the elk from your seedlings." Julia slid from the wagon, her fingers finding the rough-hewn fence posts. Beyond, wildflowers dotted the spring meadow, their sweetness carrying on the breeze. She knelt in the soft soil, hands pressed to the earth. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for mercy that grew where hate once stood." Jordan worked through the afternoon, setting new fence posts despite his healing ribs. His movements were slower but carried fresh purpose. Henry nodded farewell as evening approached, leaving them to their peace. By lamplight, they shared a simple supper. Julia's attempt at cornbread brought laughter as she pulled it, slightly charred, from the oven. Just like that first day, Jordan said softly, remembering the burnt loaf that had started their journey. Later, they sat close by the hearth. Julia's fingers traced raised letters in the Bible as she read from John, her voice steady and clear. When her hand found his, Jordan felt the last storm inside him grow still. Through the open window came the song of spring peepers by the thawed creek, nature's quiet celebration of renewal. Summer crept into the valley like a gentle tide, painting the meadows with wild flowers and warming the mountain air. Dawn light spilled over the peaks each morning, finding Jordan and Julia already at their daily tasks, their movements now familiar as an old hymn. Jordan's axe rang steady against pine logs, the rhythm matching the morning bird song. Near the cabin, Julia moved through her garden with sure steps, fingers reading the plants like braille. She had planted each row herself, measuring spaces with outstretched arms, letting touch guide her between the neat furrows of beans, carrots, and herbs. "The tomatoes are coming along fine," she called out, carefully feeling the small green fruits forming on the vines. "I can tell by their shape." Jordan paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow as he watched her. Her confidence in the garden had grown as steady as the plants themselves. Where River had seen only weakness in her blindness, Jordan saw daily miracles in how she navigated her world. Near the spring that bubbled up sweet and clear, a new wooden cross rose against the blue mountain sky. Jordan had hewn it himself from straight pine, setting it deep in the rocky soil. Julia had helped him smooth the wood, her hands finding every rough spot that needed attention. "It'll be good to have folks gather here Sundays," she said, running her palm along the cross's weathered arm. "Everyone needs a place to find peace." As evening approached, the setting sun painted the peaks in shades of amber and rose. They sat together on the hewn log bench by the cabin door, sharing the comfortable silence they'd come to cherish. The Bible lay open across their laps, its pages well worn from daily reading. "Would you read for us?" Julia asked softly, her fingers finding the familiar passage in John. Jordan's voice, once rusty from disuse, had grown stronger with practice. "The light shineth in darkness," he read, the words carrying clearly in the evening air, and the darkness comprehended it not. He paused, his free hand finding hers. "The light came back for both of us," he added quietly. Julia's smile was gentle as summer rain. "Yes," she whispered, "it surely did." Their joined hands rested on the open Bible as fireflies began their evening dance across the meadow. A cool mountain breeze stirred the pines, carrying with it the faint sound of an old hymn they both knew. Neither spoke for a long moment, content in the peace they'd found. The valley had changed them both. Jordan's long isolation healed by compassion. Julia's fear transformed by faith. What had begun in violence had blossomed into grace, proving that even the deepest wounds could mend under heaven's patient care. The fireflies flickered like stars fallen to earth, their light a reminder that darkness never had the final word. Two lives had found redemption in this mountain sanctuary, one love born of grace illuminating their shared path forward. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.